So before I go and launch into my tangent on the industry, um, one thing I really stand by, and with Kicking the Punt, we're in a unique position. As I said, we get hundreds of messages a week, and uh, from all different people, all different perspectives. And you can ask anybody that has spoken to me about, about their gambling, or even when I speak about my own addiction. I always say to people, first and foremost, they have to own their shit. They have to. If you don't own your shit, you won't beat it. I always say to people, they have to be accountable for their own actions, both past and both, what they're going to do in the future. And they have to be honest, because they do those two things, they can really start moving, down the journey of recovery. And actually, I call it a gambling demon. And I always say, you always want to, instead of letting the demon devour you, you want to devour the demon. And the way you do that is you be accountable and you be honest. And it's about having that honest conversation with yourself first and foremost, and then having it with someone else. And then there's a whole range of stuff that I'm not going to go into, that you can do to really beat your addiction. But it's not just solely blamed on the industry. And often people think, because I'm so outspoken against the industry and I'm so active in engaging them and calling them out on their bullshit, that they often get confused that I'm putting the blame solely on the industry. Well, no, I'm not. However, there's no doubt about it. Doesn't matter where you are. Just the same as doesn't matter where you are. If you struggle with a gambling addiction, doesn't matter if you're in the UK, doesn't matter if you're in Australia, Colombia, France, whatever. If you struggle, everybody's struggles is the same. Just their stories are different. And it seems to be the industry is the same as well. Doesn't matter what country you're in. The industry, they're all predatory. In Australia, poker machines are designed to condition people, and then that conditioning leads into addiction. There's no secret about that. It's fact. The industry, the gambling industry, particularly, with poker machines in Australia and particularly in New South Wales, has built a whole business on profiting from people's misery and addiction. I wouldn't have a problem with the industry if they were fucking honest as well. We're all about having an honest conversation about gambling at Kickin the Punt. They do not have an honest conversation about gambling. They do not care. They dehumanize people. They do a really good job of dehumanizing addicts. And they have to, because otherwise, how could they sleep at night? How could they look at themselves in the mirror knowing what they know and just still sleep at night? They wouldn't be able to. When we started Kicking the Punt at the start of this year, we started just by trying to help people and build a community to, eradicate the stigma that's attached to not only, gambling addiction, but all addictions, and having that honest conversation and normalizing it, because gambling's embedded in the Australian culture. And I wanted to change that conversation around gambling in our culture. What I soon realized was, and I actually realized it back in 2018 after I tried to take my life, I started a journal. And I often go back to that journal, and I've got pages of it on my laptop. And the first entry I put in that journal, I had that term predatory industry. So I even knew back then, and I was not doing anything like what I'm doing now. But like I said, I soon realized in order to remove that stigma, I had to actually challenge the industry as well. And I had a conversation with my wife before we got to, we're not big, but we're reasonably, from where we are from where we started this year to where we are now is like leaps and bounds. We're doing really good work. But day one, I said to my wife, this needs to be looked at. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, very powerful, very well connected. Are you okay with me doing this? Because my wife knows I'm very impulsive. Just because I've stopped gambling doesn't mean I'm not impulsive. And my wife also knows that I'll give the shirt off my back to anyone that needs help. And in order to help people the best way I can, I knew I had to take this head on. And that's the way I see it in my mind, is a head on fight between myself and others and the industry, and making them accountable and making them have an honest conversation about gambling. So I had that conversation with my wife, and she said, yeah, let's do it. So now where we are, through everything that I've learned, and all the connections that I've made now as well, both with politicians, people, influential people, big organisations that are trying to combat this industry. I've learned one thing, and their job is to dehumanise people, to stigmatise addicts to protect their business model. And they come up with these clever tactics. Like, one of the big ones here in New South Wales is the clubs. They've got this thing called a clubs grant scheme, where they give back. They say, we give so much back to the community. Or local Johnny's football team got new jerseys from the club. How dare you say the club doesn't do anything for the community? And they built this whole rhetoric and narrative around this thing that they give back to the community, and they really don't. They really don't care. I'll give you a perfect example. The documentary, without going into that too much now, but the documentary we are doing this year, one of the main venues that Gary gambled at was this place called DYRSL. The year that Gary suicided, which was 2018, their gross total revenue was 62 million, thereabouts, and they gave back 1.66% of their total revenue for that year. So they take 40 million through the machines, all right, and they give back 1,047,000 back to the community in voluntary contributions, and then their mandatory contributions in order to get their massive tax break was 900,000. So they take 40 million through the machines from the community, which causes absolute fucking havoc in the community, not only through people losing themselves to gambling addiction, suicide, their kids not being fed, homelessness, domestic violence, all the shit that gambling causes, and believe me, it does. Back now. And all the things that gambling causes, they take 40 million from the community and they give less than 2 million back. They don't give back to the community. They really don't. Like, compared to what they take, again, 1.66% they give back. And the average in my state is between 2 and 4%. That's all they give back. But they're very clever, and then they also give a lot of money to political parties. They also fund a lot of research through academia, and that research that's conducted by academia is what affects policy and decision making within the government. So you see, they've got their hands everywhere, and whenever someone calls them out or challenges them, they bully them, threaten them with legal stuff, all that kind of stuff, because they've got a war chest where they can just go after anyone that challenges them. But the thing is 10 years ago, a few politicians tried to stand up, Andrew Wilkie and a few others, Nick Xenophon. They tried to do the right thing. They tried to bring reform. They got destroyed. The gambling industry just went absolute into war mode and completely ripped them apart, and their reforms, didn't come through. We're now in a place in Australia, in New South Wales, where there's new reforms are on the table, but it's different this time because more people have wised up to what happens with gambling. More people are aware, and that's what we do with Kickin the Punt. We have an honest conversation about gambling. We tell our stories. We make sure they hear our stories. We show, where people take their lives because of this. We put the spotlight back on the industry. They don't like that. They don't like me, but I don't care. And we're not going to stop until something changes. But I could talk about the industry all night, and I'm not going to do that. But it needs to change. And what really needs to change first and foremost is their influence within our government needs to stop. Their influence within academia needs to stop. And they need to start, you know, the reforms that are on the table that people are trying to bring through now, basically will be there designed to protect the people that are struggling with addiction. The industry says it's only a small percentage of their customers that struggle with addiction. So why would they care if that small percentage was going to be protected by these reforms? The reason why they care is because it's bullshit. Because a lot more people struggle than what they want the public, to know. So they need to start being accountable for their business model. It's a multi-billion-dollar business model. It destroys people's lives. It ends people's lives, and they've been unchallenged really, like, for decades. And it's just created such a systemic issue within our culture, and it needs to change. And we're going to make sure that it does change. Or I will personally. I won't stop until it's changed. And not only just in poker machines, but we're now seeing with the sports betting, the wagering, Ladbrokes, all the suite of sports bet, all these companies. It's the new frontier of gambling. It'd be the equivalent of me having a poker machine in my pocket where I could access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The thought of that scares the absolute shit out of me. They're next on our list because they're doing the same thing, and what they're doing to people is just as predatory. And they can, if they want it. I'm not saying ban gambling. I'm not telling people what to do. I'm just telling the truth. And the truth is, a lot of people really get into a bad place with gambling, and it shouldn't be like that. And the industry shouldn't be set up to profit off someone else's misery and addiction. That to me is so fucked that I just can't get my head around it. And when they buy people, like when they buy politicians or they buy academics or whatever, and they want to talk about jobs and how much people's are going to lose jobs because of they bring in reform and all the shit that they come up with. To me, I sit there and I look at that and I go, how they want to talk about jobs? Why do they want to talk about jobs when fucking Gary's hanging from a tree and his body's not found for 6 days because of the fucking gambling addiction? Or how I'm sitting there smashed up in my car. They don't want to talk to me about jobs. Go and get another fucking job. You can't. I'm a tradesman. I don't walk into a job and see a massive issue and just go, I'll be right. I do the right thing because I'm a decent human being, like most people are. The whole thing needs to change. I don't know how we do it because they're so powerful, but what I do know is that things are changing in our country. And if we look at what's happened in the UK and the people that are, working with reform over there in the UK, like Gambling with Lives, The Big Step, to name a few, there's plenty around. They're all beautiful people, and how much influence and how much change they've brought about, that inspires me and makes me feel like we can actually do something over here. And what also inspires me is there's a few politicians now that are starting to stand up and do the right thing. And I lost faith in our political system many years ago, but I'm now starting to regain some faith, knowing that, politician wants to sit there and have a, Zoom meeting with me for over an hour and talk to me about how these reform, how would they look best? How would they work best? They're starting to wise up. They're starting to realize that people with lived experience or, experts by experience, that's a valuable conversation that they need to have, because there's no point bringing about reform that's not going to work. To me, my own personal opinion, the single best kind of reform that we can have in Australia is a digitised self-exclusion policy that's vigorously enforced. And if the venues don't enforce the self-exclusion, they're heavily fined. At the moment in New South Wales, I can self-exclude and walk into the same venue the next day and gamble, and no one will blink an eye. It's worth nothing, the self-exclusion policy at the moment. Thankfully, when I stopped gambling and I self-excluded, my counsellor actually lied to me and made out like it was this full digital thing where there's facial recognition, and if you go, they're going to get you to leave, and it's going to be embarrassing. He basically bullshitted me into to protect me, and I'm thankful that he did it, because if I hadn't known the truth of the self-exclusion when I signed up, it would, I might not be sitting here. You need to have a self-exclusion program that is autonomous from the industry as well, because at the moment the industry is the one that sets it up, which to me is just, it doesn't make any sense. None of this makes sense. I'm just a tiler. I'm not an academic. I'm not a politician, but it's staring me blankly in the face that this is so fucked up and so morally wrong. And it doesn't matter how much money they make, because the other big argument in Australia is that the government makes a lot of money through the taxes. Yeah, that's fine, but the social costs on gambling is 3 times greater than the money that they generate in revenue through tax. So there's absolutely no argument that stacks up as to why we should have these machines and stuff in the country. The reality is there's a few people getting really wealthy from it, and those few people have their hands in a whole lot of different pies, and they throw money at people, and they take that money to fund their own agenda, and that's just the reality of it. And that's fine, but as I said, there's enough people now in our country that are wising up to it, and I really do think things can change, especially if we go by what's happening in the UK. And yeah, we'll just have to keep trying. We just have to keep talking about it. I don't really know much more to say on the industry. Like I said, I'll probably just end up getting into a big tangent and swearing and carrying on, because that's what makes me feel. It makes me feel really frustrated that they do this to people, and they use terms like problem gambler and gamble responsibly and all that bullshit they come up with, the stigma back on the people. But to sum up, no more money in politics from industry, no more money in academia from industry. Same with what happened with the tobacco industry. The whole culture within the industry needs to change as well. And if that happens, I'm not saying ban gambling, but if that happens, that's great. People can gamble. If they get to a point where it really fucks their life up, there's a safety net, and it's a real safety net, and people can, learn from their experience and move on without gambling and be a much better person for it. Because I know myself through my own journey with gambling, I'm a much better person going through that journey because of gambling, to where I am now, and not gambling. My life's so much better. But yeah, let's just have an honest conversation about gambling. And I hope the industry's never done that in this country, and hopefully we can force them to, because that's what it's. I literally went to the head office of Clubs New South Wales, which is the peak lobby group for gambling in New South Wales and arguably in the country. And I knocked on their fucking front door, and they wouldn't have a conversation with me about gambling. So what more can I do? So we're just going to keep telling people stories, keep getting it out there, raising as much awareness as we can, and hopefully the right people listen, and hopefully, with a bit of luck, we'll get some real reform in and start saving people's lives.